And we are recording, correct?
Correct. We are recording.
We're just going to wait another 30 seconds or so for people to log in, and then we'll get started. Well, good morning, folks, and thank you all for joining us today. This Zoom call is being recorded. It will be available on our website approximately an hour and a half after the end of the call. Couple of housekeeping details. If anyone on the call is having technical issues, please use the chat function to reach us and let us know what the problem is. When it comes time for questions and answers, I'm going to ask the reporters use the question and answer function and let me know they have a question and who they'd like it to be directed to. That will enable us to better facilitate a response. Once we unmute reporters, you will also have to unmute yourself. So just keep that in mind. We'll leave your mic open after the question in case there's a follow-up, and then we'll move on to the next question. If that's all good, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with Will Baker, then Attorney General Frosh, Attorney General Herring, Attorney General Racine, and Robert T. Brown, finally, who is the president of the Maryland Watermen's Association. Will?
Thank you, John. Today, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and our partners filed suit against EPA for failing to meet its responsibilities under the Federal Clean Water Act. We thank the attorneys generals in Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and the District of Columbia who will also file suit. Before they speak, let me tell you what I personally have witnessed in the 39 years I have run CBF. I've witnessed numerous commitments to save the Bay that have been made and failed. The current agreement, the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint, is different. It has an enforcement mechanism. EPA must impose consequences if state plans are insufficient or not implemented. EPA has not only refused to enforce the blueprint, but it has rolled back fundamental federal water and air protection, fundamental federal water and air regulations. In spite of that, many jurisdictions have continued to make progress. Pollution is decreasing and the dead zone is getting smaller. But Pennsylvania, and to a lesser extent New York, have plans that fall far short of the mark and lack the funding to get the job done. Now, here is the crux of our suit. First, federal courts have upheld the legality of the blueprint. Second, a federal appeals court said that if state plans lacked a, quote, reasonable assurance of succeeding, EPA's acceptance of those plans would be arbitrary and capricious. EPA accepted the deficient plans from Pennsylvania and New York, and there is no reasonable assurance that either will get to the goal by the 2025 deadline. EPA failed to do its job, so we are suing. With only 5 years to go until the 2025 deadline, this is the moment in time for the Chesapeake Bay. This is the time for America to show that it can save a national treasure that is polluted. If not, the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint will be yet another in a series of failed bay restoration agreements. We reject the suggestion to just kick the can down the road and extend the deadline. That would be a slap in the face to all who have worked diligently to achieve their commitments by the deadline. And it's also a clear violation of the Clean Water Act. Saving the Bay is all about clean water. But saving the Bay will also support local businesses, create jobs, and provide additional environmental and public health benefits of particular importance in our current public health and economic crisis. The courts must ensure that EPA does its job. Jon, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Will. We'll go next to Attorney General Frosh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jon. Will, thanks for your very moving words. We have filed, and by we, I mean Karl Racine, the Attorney General of the District of Columbia, Mark Herring, the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Kathy Jennings, the Attorney General of Delaware, and A.G. Jennings cannot be with us this morning. We filed a separate lawsuit. And we did so because the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Act calls the Bay a national treasure and a resource of worldwide importance. It's the largest estuary in the United States. It runs right down the middle of our state, of Maryland. Less than a century ago, H.L. Mencken called the Bay a giant protein factory. In its pristine state, oyster reefs crested the waves. Fish were so plentiful that they looked at times like a carpet across the water. But we've abused it. Oysters survive today at 1% or less of their former levels. We've over-harvested some species to extinction and polluted it so badly that many more are on the brink. Each one of the states in the Chesapeake watershed is responsible, pursuant to the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Act, for designing and implementing plans to reduce the nutrients, nitrogen, and phosphorus their states add to the Bay and to the Bay watershed. Until this administration, the Environmental Protection Agency enforced the Restoration Act. If plans were deficient, EPA required states to improve their efforts. Now EPA has recognized that the watershed implementation plans, the WIPs of New York and of Pennsylvania, to be inadequate. But it's refused to take any action at all. Maryland, its citizens and businesses have invested billions of dollars to bring the Bay back to health. We will not let the Chesapeake Bay die on our watch. This has to be a collective effort. Every state in the Chesapeake Bay watershed needs to play a part, in the EPA under the law needs to ensure that that happens. What we're asking for in our lawsuit is very simple. We want EPA to do its job. Thank you very much. Now, I think it's my turn to introduce Attorney General Mark Herring. Mark is the Attorney General of Virginia, as I said a few moments ago. He has been an environmental champion for his entire career, both in the General Assembly and as Virginia's Attorney General. He is a champion of the Chesapeake Bay, and he is someone who enjoys it for recreation. It's my pleasure to turn it over to Mark Herring.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring, and I want to thank my friends and colleagues, Attorney General Brian Frosh from Maryland and Attorney General Karl Racine from the District of Columbia. And also I want to thank the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for everything that they do as a partner in helping us to protect the Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is one of Virginia's most vital natural resources. The Bay adds billions to our economy every year through tourism, real estate, fishing, recreation, and so many other industries. Unfortunately, for decades, we did not take care of the Bay, allowing massive amounts of pollution to flow into its waters, decimating ecosystems and animal populations. But because of agreements like the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, we have seen incredible positive change in the Bay's health. Blue crabs, oysters, clams, and so many other native animals and plants are flourishing. Species that we had seen rapidly declining are now coming back, and the Bay is healthier than it's been in decades. That's really the great news, but we cannot let up now and let this progress become stagnant or worse, backslide. We have to remain as committed as ever to keeping the Bay healthy. Restoring the Bay and protecting it has to be a comprehensive effort and a partnership between each of the watershed states, as well as our federal partners. We all have a great opportunity and responsibility to take care of one of this country's most important national treasures. And part of that responsibility is adhering to and maintaining the terms that we all agree to in the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, as well as holding our partners accountable and making sure they maintain the same standards. And this also means that the EPA, the administrator of this agreement, must enforce the terms and hold the partners accountable. They have to make sure that each of the partner states is upholding its end of the agreement in order to make the Bay healthier. Instead, though, we have watched as Trump's EPA has shirked these responsibilities by simply rubber stamping pollution reduction plans that are clearly inadequate, allowing some partner states to get away with doing less than others. And that's not acceptable. With today's lawsuit, we are taking action to make sure that the EPA does its job and holds every state accountable for coming up with an adequate plan that meets their pollution level goals. Our top priority must be restoring the Chesapeake Bay to its healthiest levels yet. And the only way we'll be able to do that is if each of the partners makes a concerted effort to step up and fulfill their obligations under this agreement, and that includes the EPA. We will not stand by and allow the EPA to ignore its responsibilities to enforce this agreement, potentially erasing decades of progress that we have made in reducing pollution levels and restoring the Bay. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us as we take this next step in protecting the Chesapeake Bay. And it is a real privilege and honor to turn it over and introduce my friend and colleague from across the river, Attorney General Karl Racine, who is a champion for the people and for fighting for clean air, clean water, and clean energy. Karl?
Mr. Racine, you need to turn your audio on.
The audio works better when one is not muted. Thank you very much, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Ryan Frosh, for making it clear that the Chesapeake Bay is a treasure that we need to continue to invest in. Thanks to Will Baker and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for their extraordinary work over the decades. Time does fly when you're working for an important cause. And also thanks to Robert Brown of the Maryland Watermen's Association, who will follow me. It's a pleasure to stand beside Attorney General Frosh, Attorney General Herring, and Attorney General Jennings as we're suing the EPA for failing to do its job. Under the Clean Water Act, the EPA is legally required to make sure the Bay States work together to reduce pollution and restore the Chesapeake Bay. The Bay States, the District of Columbia, and the federal government have worked together for decades to help restore the Bay and reduce pollution that harms our waters. Each state was required to implement comprehensive plans to combat pollution. The EPA was required to make sure the states upheld their commitments. All of the participating states, except two, Pennsylvania and New York, are following through on their promises. But instead of holding those two states accountable for failing to meet requirements, the EPA is refusing to act. In effect, the EPA is giving those states permission to pollute. The district is committed to reaching our own environmental protection goals, but if other states aren't pulling their weight and the EPA isn't keeping watch, this becomes far more difficult and expensive. The district has already spent millions of dollars to reduce pollution in our waterways and downstream in the bay. But we also depend on states upstream from us if the Potomac River is carrying extra pollution when it reaches us. That will make our job a lot harder. With this lawsuit, we're seeking to force the EPA to do its job. We will not allow the Trump administration to undermine decades of hard work or threaten billions of dollars of states that have already been invested to help clean up the bay. Restore the bay. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do it by a lawsuit, but we're well prepared to win in court.
Great, thank you, Attorney General. Next up, we have Robert T. Brown, the president of the Maryland Watermen's Association.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you now.
You know, it comes a bad time in history when the state of Virginia and Maryland and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has got to sue the EPA to help clean our waters up, to make them do their job up there. It's very simple. When Virginia was told what to do and Maryland was told what to do, they jumped through hoops and put a burden on a lot of people to get them to clean the bay up, which is needed to be done. And it is helping on our end, but until the influx of water we get from Pennsylvania and New York is made better for the bay, all water runs downhill. It comes all the way down through the bay. I was fortunate enough that in my lifetime, I'm 70 years old. I started into the seafood industry when I was 14 years old. And I've seen the best of the bay. I've seen it when we've had all different types of fish. Clams were very plentiful also. And oystering was great. I started out hand-honging years ago, and then when Hurricane Agnes came through, it put me into patent honging because a lot of our resources in my area died. I've worked the entire Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, from down from Smith Island all the way up to Colchester. And when we had our disease come in, MSX and Dermo years ago, we lost our oysters in the lower bay. We were able to go to the upper bay and work up off Rock Hole, Swan Point. And if it hadn't been for that, our industry would have really, really had a terrible blow to try to recover from. Now, the upper part of the bay, because of the influx that's coming down through the Conowingo Dam out of Pennsylvania and New York, we don't have that to rely on when, it's not if, it's when this disease comes back, because it just comes back every maybe 10, 15 years. So, I mean, this is so important to our industry, not only oysters, but to our different breeds of fish and stuff, to have it straight. The economic and environmental impact of this to our seafood industry is devastating. And the health of the bay, so goes the health of the bay, so goes the industry and the seafood. We are food processors, and without clean water, we cannot produce the amount of food that we used to. We only serve a portion of the people that we used to because of degradation of the bay and these states not doing what they did up north. We need to have the EPA do its job. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert T. we're going to open it up for questions now. Reporters who would like to ask a question are asked to use the Q&A function to let me know that they want to ask a question and who it is that they might direct it to. The first question I have is from Amina, and probably ought to go to Jon Mueller. Amina, we'll unmute you, and please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone. I had a question for, I guess, Will Baker or Jon Mueller. Mr. Baker mentioned that a federal appeals court said EPA would be deemed arbitrary, or EPA's actions would be deemed arbitrary and capricious if it approves state plans that were deficient. I just wanted to get details about which court this was, when this decision was handed down, and what it means in terms of this lawsuit that you all are filing today.
Alice, can we spotlight Jon?
Hi, Amina. Thank you for your question. It's Jon Mueller with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. The reference there was to the Third Circuit's decision in the American Farm Bureau case where it challenged EPA's ability to release and put forward the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you very much. I have a question from Cassie. Cassie, could you unmute yourself, and we'll unmute you, and please give us your name and your affiliation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie Miller from the Pennsylvania Capital Star. I was just wondering what lines of communication have been open between the deficient states, Pennsylvania and New York, what the response has been from them about the lawsuit and from the EPA.
John,
And you'd like to direct that to whom?
To the attorneys general.
Well, let me respond briefly. We've had conversations with the attorneys general of New York and Pennsylvania, and I know that each one of them would like their state to contribute more. It's not within their power to do that. And by that, I mean, you know, they're not the governors of the states, but they're aware of the lawsuit, and I know they would like their states to do better. With respect to EPA, we were required to give them written notice. We did that. We got no response, and consequently, we filed suit.
If I can follow up there, Attorney General Frosh, Jon Mueller again. We also sent them a second letter about 30 days after the notice letter, CBF and the states and DC, and asked them again to meet with us. And we did not receive a response from EPA at all. I think the other thing to remember here too is that when news of our notice letter was put out, Administrator Wheeler responded saying that there was no claim, that there was no case until 2025. EPA has also said that these are merely aspirational goals and do not need to be met. That is a big difference from what EPA said all the way up until 2017.
Great, thank you, John. We have a question from Brendan Ponton. Brendan, please identify yourself, your affiliation, and who you'd like the question directed to.
Good morning. Yes, this is Brendan Ponton from WTKR TV in Norfolk, Virginia. Just wondering if someone could speak to just the current status of the Bay health-wise, particularly here in Virginia, and just, you know, wondering how pollution levels are right now.
Want me to take that?
Go ahead.
So in different parts of the Bay, there are different aspects to the health and condition of the Chesapeake. But right now, Virginia has been enjoying a resurgence of natural reproduction of oysters. That's good news. On the other side of the coin, Virginia has seen a lot of algal blooms of algae, which tend to degrade water quality as they die and decompose. So we at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation see a trajectory of improvement over several decades that started to accelerate for the Bay as this blueprint was implemented beginning in 2010. And then due to some climatic issues and also a pullback by the federal government, we saw the state of the Bay begin to slip a bit. And that's what gives us such concern.
Next, we have a question or two from Tim Wheeler. Tim, can you unmute yourself?
So, sure.
Am I open now?
You are.
Okay. This has often been billed as a partnership between the states and the federal government, the various jurisdictions. Are any of you worried that by going to court, by filing a lawsuit, that you're going to break up that partnership? And can you really hope to restore the Bay if you don't have it? Anybody want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I'll take a crack, Tim. Hi, how are you this morning? Look, the Trump administration's attitude toward the environment broadly and the Chesapeake Bay in particular has been one of either neglect or hostility. I think they have set out to dismantle many of the regulations and laws that protect the environment and the Chesapeake Bay. And with respect to the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Act, this lawsuit, the tacit approval of the Pennsylvania and New York plans, which the EPA acknowledges to be insufficient, make their partnership essentially a nullity. They're not helping at this point. And we have tried, and I think Will mentioned a few moments ago, or maybe it was John, we've reached out to them on a number of occasions, asked for help, asked for them to enforce the law, and they have ignored those requests. So no, I don't think that, that this lawsuit is going to fracture the partnership. It's been essentially almost inactive for the past nearly 4 years. And if anything, we hope that this will bring life to it. Whomever is in the White House for the next 4 years, we hope they will return their attention to the Chesapeake Bay, and instead of being an obstacle to progress, be a true partner and a force for restoration for the Chesapeake Bay.
Would anyone else like to respond to that? Will?
So Tim, just 2 quick points. First is that EPA has contributed to the polarization, which has been part and parcel of this division that you're referencing. So I don't think it's the lawsuit that is going to be a cause of division if there is one, but rather it's the polarization fostered by EPA, not only here, but across the country. Second, we're talking about the Chesapeake Bay watershed, as you well know from years and years of covering the Bay. The water quality in Pennsylvania has gotten worse, not better. Cleaning up Pennsylvania's rivers and streams will benefit the Bay downstream. The miles of impaired waters designated by Pennsylvania, not by some third party, but by Pennsylvania itself, have increased from 18,000, I believe, to something well above 22, 23, 24,000 miles. We can check those exact numbers. So this isn't just about something downstream, as important as that is. It's also about Pennsylvania cleaning up its own waters for its own citizens.
Thank you, Will. Sarah Vogelsong, was your question answered already? Or would you like to jump in here?
It was answered, but I had another one.
Okay.
Sarah Vogelsong with the Virginia Mercury. Given that New York and Pennsylvania, as Will just alluded to, are the most upstream members of the partnership, what effect does their failure to meet pollution targets, what effect is that expected to have on the downstream states meeting their own targets by 2025?
Well, this is Will. I think one statistic says it all. 50% of all the fresh water entering the Chesapeake Bay comes down the Susquehanna River. So Pennsylvania and New York are integral to the health of the downstream bay. And of course, the Potomac also drains out of parts of Pennsylvania, affecting the Potomac and the District of Columbia's water quality right in the district. So the impact of the upstream states is not only huge, but it's essential to the restoration of the bay, the long-term success.
Attorney General Herring, do you want to add on to anything that Will said?
The way I would put it this way is, we've all talked about the importance of the Chesapeake Bay and how much it means to our economy, to tourism, to so many industries. And the only way we are going to be able to accomplish what we have all agreed to in meeting our goals is if everyone, all of the partner states and the district meet their goals. And the other partner in this is the administrator, the EPA. And so their part of the partnership is to review those plans and to hold all of the participants accountable to the standards we've all agreed to. And that's the problem, is that the EPA isn't doing their job. And because the EPA is not doing its job, we're not going to be able to meet our cleanup goals that we've all agreed to.
Thank you. Next question is from Steve Davies. Steve, can you give us your affiliation and let us know who you'd like to direct your question to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for doing this. I'm with AgriPulse. I assume you can hear me. I unmuted.
Yes, we got you.
For Jon Mueller, when you guys were talking about first filing a lawsuit a few months back, EPA said, and if I could just read this was their response on the legality. They said the question of whether the TMDL itself is enforceable by a court was answered by the previous administration in court filings defending the Bay TMDL. In 2016, the Obama administration told the U.S. Supreme Court that a TMDL is an informational tool that, quote, does not impose any binding implementation requirements on the states, end quote, and that, quote, the Bay TMDL does not directly regulate any sources or require any permits, end quote. The Trump administration agrees with these statements from the prior administration. Can you respond to that?
Sure. Jon Mueller again from CBF. Well, the first point, pretty rare that people rely upon briefs they file in court as a legal standard for others to follow. What needs to be followed is what the Third Circuit said and what District Judge Rambo said, which was upheld on appeal to the Third Circuit. And that is the acceptance of state implementation plans that do not achieve the goals of the TMDL, fail to provide reasonable assurance that the TMDL goals will be met. Under the Clean Water Act, that is a violation of the Clean Water Act and the Administrative Procedure Act, and those are the two bases we filed our suit upon. So we will see in court who's right about that. The other questions, you know, again, I think there are things that will need to be resolved in the course of the litigation. And I don't really have much more to add to that.
Thank you, John. That is the last question I have. Any other reporters have questions? If so, please let me know now. Absent more questions, I think I'd
John,
like to.
I got a question. John?
Okay.
Hey,
Yeah.
it's Tim Wheeler with the Bay Journal. What can EPA really do to force Pennsylvania and New York to meet their obligations when one of the primary failings is to provide enough resources to provide that reasonable assurance of pollution reductions?
Well, I'll take a first crack, and any of the others can as well. Tim, as we've seen in the past, when EPA uses its bully pulpit to tell a state that they are failing to meet their obligations, action follows. And we've seen that with Pennsylvania in the past. You say, I'll use a slightly different term, perhaps you were implying, withholding federal money to Pennsylvania be akin to cutting off one's nose to spite one's face? Yeah, you could make that argument, but we're talking, sorry, there's my phone. We're talking about much, much larger sums of money. And for EPA to withhold federal assistance to Pennsylvania, as we've seen in the past, again, that would get their attention. Finally, EPA could do the ultimate strategy. They could withdraw Pennsylvania's permitting authority under any number of potential permits that are delegated to the states, but certainly the NPDES permitting authority would be a huge deal for Pennsylvania. And that would definitely get their attention as well. So, you know, what's so sad is we haven't even seen EPA try under this administration. We've simply seen them abrogate their responsibilities, refuse to take it seriously, and that's in violation, as I think the filing will make very clear, of the Federal Clean Water Act.
Thank you, Will. Do any of you principals have any final statements? Attorney General Frosh, do you want to close with anything?
I have very little left to say except thank you to our partners. Thanks to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for its excellent work, and thanks to my colleagues, Attorney General Racine, Attorney General Herring, and Attorney General Jennings. Thanks also to the Maryland Watermen's Association. We appreciate your help and support.
Attorney General Herring, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just like to close and say that we all have a responsibility to protect this national treasure. Part of that responsibility means living up to the agreements we've made, and a part of that responsibility means making sure that the EPA holds the Bay States accountable. Unfortunately, we're going to have to resort to a lawsuit to get EPA to do its job, but we're prepared to do it, and we're prepared to win.
Thank you. Attorney
John.
General Racine, any
John,
final thoughts from you?
John,
Sure. Let me just join Brian Frosh's excellent comments, as well as those of Attorney General Herring. We're here to enforce the agreements. It's not unusual at all that when parties don't do what they're supposed to do by law, we go to a court to have the court impose the remedy. And I think that's what's going to happen here. And we urge the press, as well as the environmental community, to continue to keep a close eye on this lawsuit and continue to remain active. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I get to Will, Rachel Pasella had one additional question.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. I was wondering, so it seems like the goal of both the CBF lawsuit, filed with Anne Arundel County and the Watermen's Association is the same as the suit filed by the states. So I guess why two lawsuits?
Will, do you want to start with that, or?
Sure, and anybody can jump in. We think that the lawsuits will probably be consolidated by the court. So we're simply doing what we do at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and we're so delighted to have the attorneys generals join as well. I think it shows an unprecedented situation of support across an entire region and across different entities. And then when you add the Maryland Watermen's Association, Robert T., we're so grateful, and we look forward to working closely with you on other matters, and our other partners, as you mentioned, Anne Arundel County, but also two farmers from Virginia, Bobby White-Scarver and Jeannie Hoffman. So I think the strength is in our numbers and our diversity, and I think that's a very rare occurrence in terms of how to address saving a critical national treasure.
Thank you, Will. Just as a reminder, this Zoom recording will be available on CBF's website probably in an hour to an hour and a half, cbf.org/EPA accountability. I'd like to thank all the reporters for attending and staff for attending, and I'd like to especially thank the attorneys general for their participation today. Thank you all.
Thank you.